Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series today. Topic experts are going to share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Katsuruba, and I will be moderating today's panel. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is an organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. ATARC provides ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would love to begin by thanking all of our attendees and giving a special thanks to Dana Jackson, Brian Dennis, and the entire Akamai team for making today's event possible. This afternoon, we will hear from each of our panelists. We may have some time for a Q&A session, so be sure to submit your questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. And we're also going to be taking some polls from the audience. So please be sure to respond to those polls as well in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credit for attending today's event. Now, with that being said, I would love to welcome our panelists to go ahead and come on camera, and you can unmute yourselves because we are going to go around and we're going to do a quick introduction of who you are, what your role is at your agency or organization, and who you're affiliated with. So let us begin first with Donald Cook, please, DJ.
Yes, ma'am. My name is DJ Cook. I am the Zero Trust Program Manager for United States Transportation Command. We're responsible for global mobility operations for the Department of Defense. So happy to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And next, let's hear from Matthew.
Hey, good afternoon. Sorry about that. Matt Paserno here from Army Acquisition. And so we're looking at security to include zero trust across Army weapon and business systems across the board.
Thank you. Tim, would you like to go next?
You say Tim?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, yeah, this is Tim Denman. I'm with Defense Acquisition University. I'm the cyber learning director there. We got a bunch of people, about 12 all over the world, or all over the U.S. I started in 2022 as a rotational assignment with the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office. Ended up staying for a year, and just been really a great honor to work with that group. And what I'll say is, I talked to Colonel Cobb, the deputy at the time. He said, "So what is going to be your response after you finish this rotational assignment? Are you still going to be there to help us?" And I said, "Well, when I finish, you're going to get a lot more support from us because I'm hiring people and doing that kind of stuff. And we've been able to do a lot of training all across the DoD. So I'm really, really happy to be here. Thank you."
Thank you. And we will go to Brian Herman next.
Hey, good afternoon. Brian Herman from the Defense Information Systems Agency. And I'm responsible for all of the cyber protection programs that we have here at DISA. So we provide a lot of key cyber protections all the way from the perimeter of our DoD networks to user applications and defensive cyber operations functions. So we've been implementing Zero Trust under something called Thunderdome.
Fantastic. And we have two Brians on this panel. So Brian Dennis, let's hear from you next.
Hi, everybody. Brian Dennis. Thank you for having us today. I am the principal technologist for the public sector at Akamai. At Akamai, we are helping organizations throughout the country really redefine what it means to be zero trust and building that zero trust architecture as they start looking at the latest and greatest cybersecurity threats that are happening across the globe. And prior to joining Akamai, I was working in the university field where I helped to build cybersecurity training programs across the country, working specifically with the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor and U.S. Department of Defense, where we were building cybersecurity, everything from bachelor's, master's, to PhD programs in cyber to cybersecurity apprenticeships for kids that are in high school that want to learn more about cyber. And then also we developed a cyber defense security range where we allowed people to actually get trained on the latest and greatest threats that are out there. And so it's a great thing to be on this panel today because there's so many experts in this field. So thank you.
Thank you. So diving into our set of questions next, we're going to spend roughly 10 or so minutes on each question. I have a rough idea of who would like to answer what question, but if you want to jump in, just be sure to wave me down. You can come off mute or do the raise hand signal or something to let me know that you want to participate in this question as well. But Matthew, if we could begin with you on our first question from the list. I want to know, what is a key benefit and challenge as well associated with implementing zero trust frameworks in federal agencies, particularly when it comes to protecting critical infrastructure and sensitive data? I'm sure there are many, but just the top one that comes to mind.
Yeah, I had to really think long and hard to find one, but I think within Army and DoD, our networks are really so big that we can't rely on perimeter defenses. We really have to look at implementing zero trust to implement microsegmentation and other things, assuming compromise, so that we really have defense in depth. I mean, there are numerous benefits that I'm sure the panel will jump on as well. I think for our biggest challenge is it's primarily complexity. And our business systems, I mean, aside from just our traditional office IT, our business systems are pretty complex and pretty large. And we have to ensure that we have the right workforce to understand how to both operate and to defend those. Our tactical systems, they operate in a pretty complex environment. So Army systems pick up and move and connect and reconnect to a number of different things, often on the fly, and have to be able to go fast. Assuming that we are going to have reach back to an Active Directory or a policy enforcement point, like we can't have those decisions or we can't have those design considerations. The commercial version of a Humvee, if anybody's seen one, has a key that you put in to start the ignition. The military version doesn't, because when you have to move quickly, you don't want to be looking for somebody that has the key. And so we have to be applying those types of common sense and good engineering practices so that we can put those zero trust best practices as feasible into that tactical and space. But I think as we progress down this journey, we're going to improve both security and functionality and get better at that balance as we go.
Thank you, Matthew, for kicking us off. And I made a big mistake and I forgot about Dr. Amy Hamilton is on this panel too. So Amy, if you could introduce yourself and if there's anything else you'd like to add to this question too, the floor is all yours.
Kirst, thank you so much for having me here. And for those that do not know, I am the government chair for the ATARC Zero Trust working group, and just really happy to be here. What I want to say right now is, as we're going through some interesting times in the federal government, I think it's really important to remember our adversaries are still out there. They look for us when we are distracted. And right now, more than ever, we need to be focused on this mission of zero trust and ensuring that we are securing the data, for public trust. And so that's not going to go anywhere. And as somebody who works for the Department of Energy and is detailed to the National Defense University, the protection of our critical infrastructure remains paramount in what we do, and learning and doing better at applying zero trust into our critical infrastructure. It is great to see Transcom here and some of the other components talking about, protecting transportation, protecting weapon systems in these areas. It is just so critical that we continue down this path and that we don't get distracted by anything else, because it is of paramount to public safety. So thank you so much for having me here, Kirsten.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your patience with me. DJ, is there anything else you'd like to add when it comes to that first question that we've been discussing?
Sure. I would say that the biggest benefit from a zero trust implementation is probably the visibility and control that you have over entities, devices, and the resources that they're accessing. We get a lot of telemetry. We know exactly what's happening on the network. We can detect anomalies. We can react accordingly, whether it be defensively or business as usual. But I would say one of the key challenges that we tend to run into is technical debt. So within the DoD, obviously, we have a lot of legacy systems. And to take advantage of a lot of the zero trust capabilities, it means that we have to modernize our IT portfolio. And so that's kind of the biggest effort that we have right now, is that modernizing the IT portfolio of Transcom, so that we can start implementing a lot of the more advanced zero trust capabilities. Because ultimately, we're not trying to defend against the average everyday criminal. We're trying to protect ourselves against advanced persistent threats, and that requires upping your game, because they only have to be right once, and that's the sad part about it. So, thank you.
Thank you. And we probably have time for one more comment on this question if there's anyone else on the panel who wants to contribute. Brian, I saw your hand up first.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I would say I think there's tremendous potential for what we can get in terms of benefits from zero trust. And an example is I think we can start to challenge the historical way that we've used the classification of networks as the mechanism for determining who should have access to things and who should not. So ideally, we could collapse networks and have classified and unclassified all existing on the same network fabric. Um, but like many other benefits that you can get out of things like zero trust, many of those things can't be achieved until you've done all of the things to make sure that you're protected, to get past the technical debt and other problems that you have. You have to address all the issues. You have to tag all the data, all of that stuff. And so the feeling is that you can't get to many of the value propositions until you get pretty far along down your maturity path towards implementing zero trust.
Thank you. Yes, excellent points from all of our panelists. We are now going to go into question number 2. And Brian Dennis, if you could kick us off with this one, I want to ask, how can identity management and data segmentation be optimized to align with zero trust principles and improve overall cybersecurity posture? I think we also had a question come in around zero trust in our Q&A chat, so hopefully this will help cover it.
When we start thinking about this access management and zero trust and how can we get everything to mesh while still making our systems be as optimal as possible, there's a lot there. There's a big answer to that question. The simple concepts revolve around access management, making sure who has the correct access. Do we really need everyone to be logging onto the same systems at the same time? But then when we begin to develop and broaden out and start thinking about what does this really mean, we start thinking in the private sector, okay, well, what can we do to isolate as much of the network as possible so that there are no opportunities to move laterally through it? And so when an attack comes in, it's just not going to be as forceful as it potentially could. And so we start looking at microsegmentation. Microsegmentation is, we've already heard it mentioned once on this call already. It is going to be an opportunity for organizations to really lock out and perimeter off those systems so that those attacks, we know they're going to come in. We know that the attacks will continue. It is just, it's an unfortunate reality as the cyber attack world, these threat actors that are out there are getting better and better with time. And so for us, it's really, again, someone mentioned earlier about, they get to be lucky just once. We have to be lucky all the time. And so microsegmentation will offer us that opportunity. But then also thinking about what else is out there on the, on the horizon. We're seeing a ridiculous increase in API attacks over the last couple of years. And so what can we do to make sure that we have that visibility on every API that's working within our system? Potentially, we might have rogue APIs that are hanging out there that everybody might not even be aware about. And so, as we begin to build out our zero trust network, making sure that we have the visibility, not just of those lines of communication, and that's where microsegmentation can really come in and build us this basically a roadmap of our network to show us what's happening, but also inventorying everything that is doing anything on our system. And so knowing what all of these APIs are doing, which ones are potentially ghost APIs that are just hanging out there that don't need to be there anymore, and which ones have gone rogue and are potentially siphoning off information and data that should not have any opportunities to leave our organizations.
Thank you, Brian. Would any of our other panelists like to comment based on what's been shared so far?
There's one thing I'd like to add. I thought Brian did a very eloquent job, but I think it's important to remember the entire life cycle for cyber, and legacy systems have been brought up. We definitely need to address the replacing legacy systems, but really understanding supply chain risk management. So if you look at when the federal government really kind of kicked off, hey, we need to start really focusing on this. A lot of it had to do with solar winds, and that had to do with the supply chain issue. And so we need to make sure that we don't just focus on any one aspect or any one point in time, that we are looking at this holistically as new technology is coming on, quantum and AI, and moving in those directions. Technology is going to continue to accelerate faster. We need to get rid of, and replace the legacy systems. And we need to constantly keep that eye on supply chain as we're looking at this. It's super interesting if you look at the AI wars right now, right? And suddenly it's like, oh, there's this AI from China, and just like we saw with Kaspersky, where very good, well-intentioned people bought, and put onto government systems, antivirus software that was coming out of Russia. We need to be very cognizant of that understanding of supply chain and making sure it's not innocent people trying to do the right thing, that we're constantly there, we're constantly vigilant, and we're constantly making it aware to those people who are on our procurement side, so that we are doing the right things. And it's a holistic life cycle. It's not a moment in time. It's continuous.
Thank you, Amy. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things to think about as we go through this is you do in zero trust, you do have to trust. You do have to trust people, but you can never, ever trust packets. I'll give an example. Amy and I have worked together on some things. I have a great trust in her level of knowledge and expertise and everything else there, and we can work together well on some things. Um, but again, I gotta make sure that Amy, who she is, who she says she is. If I get an email from her that says, something something that's a little bit off, I may question that. And I just come back to say, when you talk about identity and access management, and again, get into the supply chain and everything else, everything about what we're doing is designed to understand that the virtual world is a lot of people can spoof, a lot of people can claim to be who they really are not, or claim to be someone and have an alternate type of a universe out there. So you've got to, it's that whole mentality that has to change in every part, every asset of the supply chain, and every asset of our networks.
Thank you for bringing that point up, Tim. And lastly, we have a question that came through in the audience, which is, how do panel members, so whoever wants to jump in and answer this, think about zero trust for operational technology? So things like HVAC, SCADA, security systems, etc., things that control everything from thermostats to presence sensors and anything else you can think of. I thought that was an interesting question from the audience. Go ahead, Brian, Dennis.
Yeah, so when going back to microsegmentation, and so if you're going to have those systems within your network, understanding how they're communicating and where those lines of communication are happening. We've seen attacks that really began, and we look back at the history of cyber attacks. I think about some of these attacks that were really, really good sized attacks that happened because a thermostat was left vulnerable. I remember one that happened years ago where it was actually somebody had a fish tank in their office and they were monitoring the temperature inside their fish tank via a thermostat that connected to a couple of devices. And the next thing you know, the entire system was corrupted. And so that visualization, understanding those lines of communication is going to be so important. So when you are bringing in devices, specifically IoT devices or anything else that's connecting to your network in a wired way, to understand that line of communication, to making sure that if it is potentially vulnerable, that there's no opportunity for an attacker to come in and move laterally through the system, that it immediately gets segmented off and there's no communication that can go forward.
Amy, did you want to add anything else?
Yes, and for those of you not aware, for the ATARC Zero Trust Working Group, we are going to have a lab series coming up, Lab 3, and one of the ones is operational technology because this is so critically important. And as we're in this world where we're increasingly connected, where we expect to have this access with our phones, and great example of Brian of that thermostat that was hacked, and it was actually a casino in Vegas, and ironically, when you think of fish tanks and it hacked the whaling database, so there is a lot of irony in that story and fishing. So when you think about that and you think about operational technology and you look at what happened with Colonial Pipeline, a lot of the concern was there ways to access between the IT and the OT systems. If you look at the water filtration system hacks that happened into our water supplies from Iranian hacktivists, who realized that we had some Israeli products that were being operated. This continues to escalate. It used to be very much, and I'm going to look at from the lens of being at the National Defense University, that it was like soldiers had to go ahead and then they would have like explosives and blow up a dam. But they don't need to do that anymore. You can have your cyber warriors who can just open up the gates to that dam and still flood that same valley. So we've really, really changed the parameters on this. And if you look at, for instance, right now where we are using drones, it's super important that those drones, which are part of operational technology, they cannot be hacked and those same devices be used against us and get turned around and have the wrong targeting, for example. So these are just a few examples, but when you just look at our interconnected world, it is absolutely essential that we look at these zero trust principles. And what I can tell you is that we do have a working group in the federal government side underneath the federal CISO council, really looking at operational technology and making sure that that's getting addressed, because this is really where you're looking at public safety for the people. So keep all those things in mind. And if you were out there, if you are a cybersecurity professional and people are looking to connect a device and they're like, oh, this doesn't matter, it's just a vending machine. Is there a way when that vending machine gets installed that then somebody could ask that vending machine and use that as a backdoor into your network? It works both ways. You have to be just very vigilant now.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to call for poll question number 1. So again, this is for our audience. If you want to receive your CP credit for today's event, please be sure to respond to poll question number 1. It is up on the screen right now. The question is, what is the core principle of a zero trust security model? Please answer that. And then we will close it out, and the results should be posted on the screen shortly if you're curious what everyone has to say. That being said, let's jump into our third question for our panelists. And just let me know who wants to respond to this first. But the question is, what advancements in real-time threat detection are proving most effective in supporting the transition to zero trust? And how can agencies integrate these technologies? Anyone from the panel who would like to jump in, just wave me down. I'll call on you.
So I'll take a shot at that one if that's all right. One of the things that I'm very happy to leverage some of the advances that exist in threat detection to learn from our peers that are out there in industry and figure that out. But we also know that in the federal government, in the Department of Defense, we may have different threat vectors, and so one of the things that I'm particularly excited about is the ability to harness artificial intelligence to look at the data that we have. I've told our teams we have a mountain, a wealth of data that may present some different threats and an understanding of how we should respond to those threats within the Department of Defense, for example. So what we've been trying to do is to do exactly that, to leverage internal to the department our ability to get commercial things, but also to look at our own threats based on the attack models that we see coming our direction, and then automating the response. So helping us, I think it's probably fair to say that that we should at least be able to automate 80 or so percent of the responses that our defensive cyber operators have, because we've gone to the effort to try to figure out what the access control rules are. And so when things appear to be violating them, and then we have threat identification from industry, from ourselves, we have more of an ability to say, let's take some specific action in that case, rather than doing a lot of manual research. I think that we have the ability to make a big difference in the lives of our cyber operators, because there's no way that we can people our way out of this problem.
Thank you, Brian. Very well said. Would anyone like to add anything to that or comment based off of Brian's response? If not, we can move to the next question.
Just real quickly, he's spot on. You know, we have got to take advantage. And again, if you look at what we're doing with Zero Trust, you see over and over how we have to take advantage of AI, machine learning. You know, when we talk about continuous monitoring, all those type things, it comes back to how are we, you know, those type of things are really important as far as specific things that are going on. You know, that's a question that's going to have to be dependent on the kind of system you have, the specific needs. You really need to be able to analyze that well. But you're absolutely right that we got to take advantage of what we already have out there. We don't need to just let the bad guys take advantage.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Okay, anyone else on the panel want to respond next? We also have a few questions in the chat if there's any in particular that you see come up and you want to address them. Matthew.
Hey, Kirsten.
Yep.
Hey, I'll just say, I think, you know, one of the things like DJ said, and given the complexity of like the Army space, I'm trying to be a pragmatist, and there's going to be areas where we can implement easier, and there's going to be areas where there's going to be a challenge. So I think some of those technologies that give us that more fidelity, like DJ said in the beginning, like even just the visibility of our networks, so that we can see ourselves and figure out where we can really harden and where we can have to add risk, or sorry, where we have to accept risk, and over time burn that down. I think those are the technologies, and just that feasible approach are really what's going to help us implement it across the board.
Thank you, Matthew. Brian Herman.
Yeah, I just wanted to. I saw a note in here in the Q&A, and the comment is probably a valid one. You know, many of the folks that have gone to work on adopting zero trust principles start with some of the network pillar functions, and part of that has a relationship to the fact that we have legacy technology and we have tech debt that we have to get after, but it also allows us to encapsulate things so that we can then get after all those other things. For me, that just seems like a logical starting place. It's certainly not the end point of where we need to be, but every step matters. And, you know, like I call it progressively less trust, not zero trust. And so getting to the point of having less trust means that you just have to start somewhere.
Thank you, Brian. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah. So I love the question by one of the attendees about you know, we have a big focus on the network side. It shouldn't be all about the network. Let me just give you something that I see, and I think this is pretty big. If you go, probably one of the most famous cyber charts anywhere is the CSIAC, Cybersecurity and Information Systems Information Analysis Center. They have a cybersecurity chart. It is developed by the deputy CIO for cybersecurity. If you go and look at that, the title of that chart is Build and Operated a Trusted DoD, you know, DoD Information Network. Guess what? There are over 200 policies, and you're never going to get there. You're never going to have a trusted DoD, and that's the whole point. You know, you've got to assume that there is a breach. So everything that you do has got to assume that you can never get to a trusted network. the first thing and what's so important in all this is the engineering side of things, the architecture side. Everything that you do there, it's got to start from the beginning. If you're doing a legacy system, in some cases, I think we need to reconsider legacy systems a little bit more than we do. I know we're crunched with money and all those type things, but sometimes those legacy systems are causing more problems than we really need. So, the main thing is the biggest message I would give is cybersecurity is about engineering. It's not about addressing problems after the fact. It's about engineering, and we've got to be engineering, not thinking about building a trusted Doden. We've got to be engineering our systems thinking that we're going to have a breach. So how do we change that? And we've talked about segmentation and all those type of things. That's what we've got to look at as we go forward.
Thank you, Tim. DJ.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions related to the data side of things, and why we're kind of dancing around that, and kind of dwelling more on the networking side, because I would say that the data side is a hard nut to crack. When you think about it, even from a perspective of identifying structured and unstructured data, requiring originators to go through and actually appropriately mark and identify that data. If we have, we'll just say, decades and decades of individuals not necessarily following best practices to appropriately handle that data, tag it, whether it be a file or anything like that on a shared drive, you've essentially built a mountain of stuff that you would need to go through. So automation is key. So looking at ways to make it less of a user burden, and be able to leverage tools that are coming out to kind of go through that data and help you identify it, where it becomes more of, hey, the tool says, hey, I think this data is PII. Then it's you have less to sift through. You have an individual that can basically validate, hey, the tool found the correct stuff. Let it go out and continue to do its job. But then we also run into this problem when it comes to data tagging, is that but within the DoD, let's just say something, for an example, like a tank. A tank to me, maybe a tank to someone different in the Army. A tank in the Army is a vehicle that shoots artillery rounds, whereas a tank for a guy who does petroleum, it could be a tank that holds gas in it. So finding a way to take all of those data catalogs and find a way to cross-reference each other, so that we all know that when the Army says tank, it means something, it means this particular aspect, but that characteristic actually is federated up to a higher level, to where we all got a common lexicon when it comes to data, and data tagging, I think, is important. But to kind of boil it down, I think it's just the data element of it is hard. I would say that if there's one area within the DoD where we're kind of waiting on a little better governance, it's within the data realm. So thank you.
Thank you, DJ. Amy, go ahead.
DJ, I'm glad that you hit that. And if I could rebrand Zero Trust, the one thing I would do is not call it Zero Trust and call it data-centric security. And, when you look at traditional net-centric security that came up from Tim, we have to move the mindset away from that. If you look at the world today, and one of the questions came from Gary in the chat about mobile platforms. I mean, we have completely moved away from the network. Like, the network is dead. The perimeter is dead. We are in a mobile world. You're on the go. This is what you are expected to do. And it's that data, it is application rationalization, is understanding what applications you have in your mobile devices, it is understanding what mobile devices you have out there. And if that mobile device is compromised, how quickly can you disengage it from your applications, from your systems. And so I think it's a really different way. But more importantly, whether you want to look at it from the perspective of anything else, is how do you look at it, is the data on that system, right? It's the data that is being transferred through that application. In the end, it's really about the data. And I'm going to go back to operational technology for a second, because sometimes people are like, oh, Amy, you're talking about data, what about operational technology? The ones and zeros that tell an actuator to do something is still data. It's a different type of data. And we have to recognize, though, in the end, it's data that might tell a machine to take an action. It is data that gives you information. It is still the data that matters the most. And that's where we really kind of have to think about it that way, as, net-centric security is gone. It is all about data-centric security.
Thank you, Amy. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on to our next question, but feel free to keep weaving in audience questions so that we can try and hit as many as possible. But I want to start this next question, Brian Dennis. What role do public-private partnerships play in addressing the technical and resource challenges of adopting zero trust frameworks across government systems? So we'll start with you, and then I'd love to hear a government perspective.
Well, as somebody from the private sector, I feel like our role is really to be there as functional assistance for these organizations as they move through the zero trust concept. Prior to joining Akamai, I was on the other side, and so I was on the government side, working in universities across the country and helping to address the skills gap. And I think that's really where the public-private partnerships are helping a lot right now. When we think about the cybersecurity skills gap that's existing in the U.S., we've got about 1.5 million people working in cybersecurity throughout the U.S. We've got about 500,000 jobs that are open, and so the labor shortage out there in cybersecurity. How do we deal with less personnel while we're trying to do more? And in organizations where budget constraints are a huge issue, it's hard for them to pull more people in. I think probably everybody on this call would probably tell you, I need more people. But a lot of the times we just can't find them. And so, being helping to build that private-public partnership so that we can help organizations move forward and grow, and at the same time, we all have to become evangelists for our field. And so, I think everyone who's a panelist on this call and every person who's participating today, start talking about the fact that cybersecurity, it is a field that is growing. It's where you want to be in the future. One of the things that I do, even though I work for Akamai as a private company, I go out to schools once a semester and talk to students and tell them, this is an exciting field you want to be in. You may have never really thought about it, but this is where you want to focus your efforts. And we're not just talking about the engineers of the world or who's going to be our next network administrators. We need to think about everybody, even the marketing specialists. How do you talk about cybersecurity? How do you, build this into a conversation where people aren't just completely confused and just want to shut off? And that's where the gap has, been an issue for us, and being able to talk about this openly. And that's one of the areas where I think the public-private partnership can excel as well, is helping people to see this need.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Matthew, go ahead.
Yep. Thanks. No, absolutely. I think that having that shared lexicon and being able to have those conversations between industry and government and academia are absolutely critical. Within DoD, our new secretary is talking a lot about rebuilding our capabilities, the industrial base, acquisition, rapid delivery of capabilities. We can't do that without public-private partnerships. And that's, I think, really for two big reasons. One, I think my new friend, Amy, data-centric security supply chain, our data is everywhere. It's in the industrial base, it's in academia. We need to ensure that that is not corrupted before it comes into the department. So we need to collaborate to ensure that that our partners are implementing that good security, so that we can implement that and collaborate securely. The other part, I think, is we can't expect our partners like Brian or others in industry to really understand our operating environment unless we define it for them. And that's through consistent engagement. That's ensuring that we put those requirements in our contracts and ensuring that industry understands what we're asking for and hopefully understands our use case better than we do, so that they can help bridge those gaps and propose things to us. We have to work to actively incentivize that, or else we're not going to get what we're going to need, and we're just going to be building up our technical debt. For us, the way we do that, I think we're really interested in either developing reference architectures and publishing those, posting on sam.gov or for requests for information. And we do that because we take that feedback from industry and partners very seriously. So that's something we'll continue as a basis for that continued collaboration, which is so key for delivering those capabilities and accelerating that delivery. Thanks.
Thanks. Last comment here, DJ.
Oh, I was going to add on to what Matthew was saying, but he kind of covered a lot of it. So the one thing about Transportation Command is that I would say that 80% of what we do is dependent on commercial industry, commercial transportation service providers. And I would say that the areas that we try and partner with them is trying to drive them towards better cyber hygiene, improving their systems, whether it be through partnerships with people like NSA, DC3, DHS, and CISA underneath them, but really trying to ensure that their hygiene is at an acceptable level. That way, when their systems are connecting up to ours to, basically execute transportation missions, that is not the weakest link and compromises our systems. I would say that, things like the cybersecurity maturity model certification kind of, are taking us down a path to maybe shore up some of those areas, but it certainly falls short of what we're trying to do from a zero trust perspective. And I think that maybe, in the near future, we'll start seeing a push to try and get the private sector, especially those contracting with the federal government, to start taking on some of the requirements that zero trust is going to, the benefits that zero trust is going to provide for them. Um, but like I said, it really comes down to doing the best that we can to provide them the resources they need to better themselves, ultimately, because we have such a dependency on them when it comes to mission execution.
Thank you, DJ. Okay, we're going to take a quick pause here, and I'm going to ask for poll question number 2 up on the screen. So again, for folks at home, this is the audience poll question. Which of the following is not a key component of a zero trust architecture? Be sure to respond to that if you'd like to receive your CPE credit, and then the results of this poll will be up on the screen shortly. So moving right along, we're going to go to our last question just to ensure that we have enough time for key takeaways at the end. So for our next question, I'd love to start with Matthew. I want to talk about best practices or lessons learned from early zero trust adopters that can help other organizations overcome common hurdles and help to achieve that long-term success that we're looking for.
Sure. I might have a unique perspective, I guess. I think given the complexity of our space, I tend to be a pragmatist, and it's not going to be zero trust out of the box. I think cybersecurity is about good engineering, and zero trust is going to be an evolution. And organizations that adopt that evolutionary mindset of at least fixing the low-hanging fruit activities that we can do today, improving visibility, integrating those better technologies, and having that deliberate path. I think if some leaders walk around, a conference, there's going to be 100 vendors selling zero trust in a box. It's not that, but it's also not something totally new. So aligning what we're doing, identifying the gaps, and really taking that risk architecture and total security approach to zero trust will help prevent those knee-jerk reactions. Because what we also don't want to do is prevent people from coming into the game because we're making it sound so hard. And so it has to be a risk-informed discussion where we implement those over time and we ultimately get to meet those objectives.
Thank you, Matthew. Let's go to Tim next.
Yeah, so agree with you on those things. The big thing I would say is what we've already said about starting with the data, understanding your critical assets, those kind of things. But the next thing when you talk about implementation, lessons learned that I see is you have to go across the pillars. You're not going to just get. I mean, if you look at the pillars, whether it's DoD or it's the cybersecurity, not the maturity model, but the CISA maturity model. If you look at those, you have got to go across the pillars. That's really important. But one thing that it's critical with change management, and I've got to really stress this, and that is celebrating wins. Celebrate that we're actually doing good, and that comes into metrics and everything else. And I want to point you guys to a resource that tells you it's working. And if you can prove to people things are working, that's really important. But look at the DOT&E reports, the Department of Test and Evaluation reports over the last couple of years. They say, hey, we have over 20 years, cyber has always been the #1 issue. Finally, for the first time in the last 3 or 4 years, they said, it's still the #1 issue, but we found that we're having trouble penetrating zero trust systems. You know, those type things have got to be shouted from the rooftops. We talk about cultural change and everything else, but we've got to use some metrics, and we got to say, no, this isn't just compliance. This is actually making a difference right now. And I believe we've got a really good set of things to do that. That's what's got to be done more than anything else from my perspective.
Thank you, Tim. Brian Dennis, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, and so Tim just really kind of summed up what I was going to say, but additionally, taking this risk-based approach to zero trust and that understanding that, we are going to make mistakes along the way and learning from those mistakes and then talking to others about their mistakes. There are fantastic people on this panel who are in this industry, and a lot of the times they can't necessarily talk about the exact work they're doing, but they can tell you these are some of the things I've learned. And so when you're looking at everything that's going on in our industry, being that constant learner, I know for a lot of folks that get into industries, it's you check a box and you're done, and you might get a CPE or something, but pay attention to what we're talking about, because these are the people that you can learn so much from. And so not being afraid to ask questions, to say, I'm going through this process now. Where is that happy medium where I can start and really taking a look at this pathway moving forward, as just to start saying, well, it's time to check this box and I'll be done with it, because that's just not going to work for anyone.
Thank you. Brian Herman.
Yeah, I guess I like the totally kind of non-technical answer to this, which is communicate. And it sounds odd, but I think everybody that's been any distance down the path of zero trust will be happy to share the things that have worked well for them and the things that have worked poorly. But the other part of it is kind of related to what Tim said. Communicate with those folks that are not zero trust zealots. Talk to them about why it matters to them, so that they're adopting the identity capabilities and things that you need them to do as well. So there's more work that has to happen, but if we only talk to ourselves, we kind of lose an understanding of what the value proposition is of the kind of security that we're providing.
Thank you. Amy, you're next.
Perfect. And thank you so much. And I love that we went in the whole people, process, technology aspect. We're really on that people approach. And everything that was said is spot on. And I want to expand the conversation, though. You have to have the executive buy-in. You have to be able to go to the mission owners, the business owners, and convince them of why it's important. So often, cyber people are just looked at the just say no people. I started off in that world. You came to the office and people knew you were going to shut down whatever great idea they had, right? And I think we have created a much better partnership. But the other part of that is if you're looking at data center security, because I think part of it was we had this divide, right? So as a cyber person was like, I'll just protect you all and you're all equal, right? Well, that's not the way things normally work. So you have to make sure you understand what is that important data, what is the most important thing that you need to protect, and that you build everything around that. There are certain things out there that is just not as important to protect. At an organization that I work with very well, they had an instance where public facing documents weren't defaced, they were just accessed. And they were calling that a breach. And they're like, no, like you were able to access documents I've literally put out there for you to access. Like, good. You did it in a different, innovative way. But hey, you know what? Like, not a big deal here. Nothing to see. And so we have to assume there is going to be those breaches. But if people are literally trying to steal information you want them to have, like, good. Like that's actually a win, right? So don't put all your resources to protecting access to data that you want people to have. Put those resources to that data that you don't want them to have. Put the resource to the data where you absolutely look at data integrity to be absolutely, the vital aspect. Understand your CIA, and in the cases of operational technology, add that S for safety, right? Confidentiality, integrity, accessibility, safety. Go back to those basics. Go to those business owners, go to those mission owners, understand what's most important to them, and use that data centric approach using these zero trust, maturity models in that way. And you're going to be so much more successful. You're not going to sit there and put like this massive, uh, military grade fence around your house, right? Like it's not going to happen. But you do need that military grade fence around certain facilities, right? And so you want to make sure you're applying the right security to the right things.
Thank you, Amy. And last comment here, DJ.
Yeah, I'll be pretty quick because I think Amy's a mind reader. What I was going to say is the biggest lesson that there's two lessons. Don't try and boil the ocean. Like Amy said, not everything is as important. Prioritize what is important first, and then you will be more successful at it. Because in the end, we have a lot of systems across the DoD. Not all of them are going to make it across the finish line, but not all of them need to make it across the finish line. We need to prioritize what is necessary to actually keep the business going. And in our, business, obviously the nation's defense. And then the second lesson I would say is probably the biggest one of all is that you have to be able to socialize this to people that are non-technical. They have to buy in. They have to support it. I will tell you that the first couple of months of taking over this program, the biggest thing that I did was make sure that I talked to the people that own the money and the people that made the decisions on how the money was spent. So if you can't win them over, you're not going to get their support, and you're going to be fighting a losing battle. And that's about it. So thanks.
Thank you, DJ. Okay, we are going to put up our third and final poll question again for the audience at home. If you want to receive your CPE credit, the third and final poll question is on the screen, which is how does Zero Trust approach network segmentation? So please respond to that. And then for the last 10-ish minutes, 9 minutes, I want to hear from each of you on what your key takeaway from this discussion is. So try to keep your response to around a minute or so, and then we will wrap up this conversation. So if we could begin with Tim, I would love to hear what your key takeaway from this conversation has been.
Okay, thank you, and I'll do my best to be quick. The big thing is it's about the data. It's not about defense in depth anymore. And there's even a chance that you could even save money on zero trust implementation. It's a completely different way of looking at protecting not just your network, but everything related to your system. So as I say, it's about the data. Start there first, then you can move forward. But it is not, the big thing I'll say is it's not about compliance. It is about real world protecting yourself from people and from the enemy. And as we say, being able to recover from that and moving on.
Thank you, Tim. And next we will go to Matthew.
Thanks. No, I definitely like the concept of data-centric security, so I'm going to use that or near zero. I think either way, zero trust or the technology to implement it is still a means. And I think there was a comment about like CUI. If you don't have the actual natural language policy and priorities of what you're trying to do, you're just going to implement the wrong things anyway. So I think it's really important to take a step back and organizationally look at what is really important. What is the data that I need to accomplish those important things? And then how can I leverage zero trust to protect that data for the ultimate organizational outcomes that we need, whether that's industry or government. And if you do that, I think you can communicate that both internally within your organization and across your partners. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. And we will go to Brian Herman next.
Sorry about that. So I think I agree. I think Amy wins with the name. I think data-centric security is probably the best name that I've seen in the discussion. The thing that I would take away though is don't feel paralyzed because of your tech debt. Don't feel limited because of the maturity of your organization. Take a step, check off one thing in one of those pillars, and check off another thing in a different pillar, and make some forward progress. You will be preventing attacks. You will be making headway, and you'll find that there is some element of just inertia that comes as a result of that progress.
Thank you, Brian. Let's hear from DJ next.
Sure, and I'll even try and answer the last question that was in there. So, and Brian's already kind of hinted on it, is that like he was saying, is incremental progress. You'll find that as you decompose the requirements for zero trust, that some of the things you already do, those are quick wins. You may need to do very little to meet one of those capability activities. And then as you start, getting that success, just build off of it, keep the momentum going. It doesn't matter where you stand to, whether you're a very mature cybersecurity architecture or in its infancy. Just don't, like he said, don't be paralyzed. Do something, because doing nothing, we know what it's going to result in. But at least incremental progress is something, and you may find that that incremental progress does make it harder. And I don't want to say it in too mean of a way, but when you're getting chased by a bear and you're faster than the other person that's behind you, they may be less likely the bear's going to eat them instead of you. So if you're just that much, your security posture is that much better, you may be the one that doesn't get it, and it may be somebody else. So
Thank you, DJ. And Brian Dennis.
Thanks. And great analogy, DJ. And so for me, it's when we talk about, the panel today and everyone, it's just listen. Everyone on this panel has a story. Everybody's got an incident they went through, or some just event or anomaly that just kind of drove them crazy as they're going through the zero trust concepts. And so, if you're building this within your organization, just continue that line of communication. Talk to your partners, talk to your peers, talk to private industry, learn as much as you can, and pay attention to what's going on out in the world. As practitioners in cybersecurity, we all need to be aware that we're in an industry that doesn't change by the week, month, day. It changes by the second. And so what can be normal for us today, within a matter of minutes, can completely blow up our entire world tomorrow, because there's a 0 day out there that no one knew about. The next thing you know, we're all scrambling to get it fixed. And so pay attention to what's happening, and just listen and be ready to be flexible in this concept of building a data-centric organization or on this zero trust pathway. That's the best advice I can give.
Thank you, Brian. And lastly, we'll hear from Dr. Amy Hamilton.
Just what a wonderful panel, and so happy to be here and meet my fellow panelists. Great conversation. I want to leave with something that I know a lot of people, especially DoD people, rankles them. Accept failure. It is okay. I have failed at so many things in my life. And the best thing about when you fail is you move on. And Jim Collins talks about in his book, Good to Great, is the enemy of greatness is goodness, right? Because then you're like, oh, I'm good enough. I'll just survive. But when you fail, you're like, oh, I've got to do something different because I just epically failed at this. The first time I had my personal website to face, I was like, really like, oh, well, this is a bad thing. And then, I continue to learn and improve and build my own computers throughout my life and do better, right? And so I think it's so important to realize we're going to fail, and failing at little things and failing at innovation and having a pilot and having the pilot fail. That is the intent of pilots. So we have to just change this cultural mind shift. We have to move into a world where it's okay. Like try it, fail quick, do the next thing, learn from these mistakes. And like Brian Dennis keeps saying, learn from other people's mistakes, right? Like that is one thing I have learned in life is listen to people's stories, especially older people who have that wisdom, who can tell you why certain things were done. And you're like, oh, like who knew, right? Like just learn, get to know each other and talk. And one of the great ways to do that is through our ATARC Zero Trust Working Group. We do have this amazing group. We have monthly sessions as well as all the ATARC Zero Trust labs. And the really exciting thing is our lab phase 2 closed out. And from that phase 2, we're developing a matrix so you can see all the different vendors and suppliers who are part of that. And it shows you where these things were against the different pillars based on the use cases that we had. And those were written by different members from our government members. And what is really exciting, if you have not participated, you're looking at, hey, what's going on in this, lab phase 3 series? Should I do this? Is we are having people come to us now from all kinds of parts of the government, and all the different videos that were recorded from lab phase 2 are accessible to any member of the government. And that includes state, local governments. If you want to come to us, let us know. We have had Huntsville municipal utilities come to us. We have had members of the military who were out in Vicenza, Italy come to us now. And we're like, how are you hearing this? And as people spreading the word from communities like this, and we want to make sure we're getting that out to you. We want to make sure that we're bringing you real and actual solutions where you can see, is this going to fit into my environment? And now in the lab phase 3 series, we're including processes, we're including metrics, we're including people, we're including training. What we want to do is making sure that as the government representatives into the group, we're giving you what you need. And so at any time, if you just want to PM me, link into me, send me a message, I am happy to make sure I'm that advocate for you, because all of us working together in this partnership that we're going to be more successful. So thank you so much for everybody who attended today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much. And our partners at Akamai for making today's event possible. There is probably going to be a last poll question just about whether you'd like to receive your CPE credit or not. There it is. And with that, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you at the next ATARC webinar.